Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest in the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival's Industry Forum series. My name is Pat Nurse and I'm the Creative Director of Melbourne Food and Wine Festival. As I'm sure you know, back in March, the federal government announced the JobKeeper assistance program, a program which in essence is a wage subsidy designed to help businesses keep staff employed. In lockdown one, we had many questions about what the end of JobKeeper would look like. And while many of those questions have been pushed out rather than answered as the pandemic has deepened, the government has announced some detail about the tailing off of the program and other staged changes to JobKeeper in general. The first bracket comes into effect, the first bracket of those changes comes into effect a little over a month from now, with further changes slated for January 4 and 28 March. Joining us today to walk through those changes and hopefully to answer your questions about them is Freddie Deegan. Freddie is a chartered accountant and a director of On Tap Hospitality. He has more than a decade of experience operating, analysing and providing feedback on a wide variety of hospitality venues, ranging from pubs and clubs to bars and restaurants. And he's all about providing practical solutions in problematic areas. Freddie, good afternoon.
Thanks, Pat, and hello to everyone joining us today. I'll just set up my screens for us and get the presentation up.
While Freddie's setting up, I'd like to add that we're joined off screen by Freddie's colleagues, Andrew and Tony from On Tap. So if you've got any questions during the presentation, type them into the Q&A box, which you'll find down the bottom of your Zoom screen, and they'll do their best to answer them as we go along. I should add too that the answers that Freddie and the guys will be giving us today will be based on the JobKeeper guidelines that have been published to date. There is further changes to the legislation on the way, so they're just going to answer the questions on the best available information today. Is that about right, Freddie?
That's spot on, Pat. Yeah, look, without the legislation to support us, we'll be providing as best advice as we can, but we do want to make sure that we're not providing the wrong advice without that legislation behind us. So, Pat, you happy if I jump in?
Let's do it. Let's go.
Okay. Alrighty, guys. Hello to everyone joining us today. My name is Freddie Deegan, and as Pat mentioned, I'm a director here at On Tap Hospitality. We provide external payroll, bookkeeping and management accounting services to restaurants, pubs and bars across Victoria and over the border into New South Wales. We are a joint venture with Shinewing Australia, a mid-tier accounting firm here in Melbourne, and actually have a couple of JobKeeper experts from Shinewing Australia in Jay Dembricat, Tony Precipe and Andrew Nutman, who will be on hand to assist with your questions as we progress through today's presentation. As Pat mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A below, and Jay, Tony or Andrew will do their best to answer them for you. Just a reminder that the questions will come through with your registered name, so if you'd like to ask questions anonymously, just ensure you've selected that option prior to submitting your application or submitting your question. Additionally, there will be a Q&A opportunity at the end of this presentation, so if any questions remain unanswered, I will do my best to get to each of them before we finish today. My goal today is to be as informative as I can be while keeping the complex legislation as simple as possible so that you have the tools ready to tackle the next stage of JobKeeper. So let's get into it. So where are we? Right now, we are at JobKeeper 1.0, and this JobKeeper scheme runs until the 28th of September. If you're an existing JobKeeper recipient, then you should meet the eligibility criteria set out in this slide. For example, you needed to be actively engaged in a business as at 1 March, to most likely have shown a 30% decline in GST turnover, and to have met the wage conditions. It's important to note that if you are not participating in the JobKeeper 1.0 scheme, it's not too late. You have until the 28th of September to register for the scheme, and I'd strongly encourage you to do so. A couple of weeks ago, the federal government announced some changes to JobKeeper 1.0, including increasing the eligibility of employees to join the scheme. The employment test date is now 1 July 2020. This means that any new full-time or part-time employees who were employed between 1 March and 1 July can now be added to the scheme, as well as any casual employees whose 12 months of service falls between these dates. We will get into this a bit more in the next slide. One thing I would like to draw your attention to is the fact that the ATO have begun issuing questionnaires to businesses who are receiving JobKeeper. These questionnaires are designed to ensure that businesses receiving JobKeeper are eligible to do so. These questionnaires request supporting documentation such as completed employee nomination notices, accounting records and lodgement receipts. Not all businesses will receive these questionnaires, but if you do receive one, it should not be ignored. It is important to have all of your paperwork in order in case you do receive such a request from the ATO. Now, there is a lot of information in this slide, so I'll leave it up here for a moment. If you have any questions regarding JobKeeper 1.0, please send them through the chat now. I should also mention that this presentation and recording will be made available at the conclusion of this webinar. We hope it will be a handy resource for you over the next few weeks. Alrighty, moving on to registering a newly eligible employee as part of JobKeeper 1.0. The announcement a couple of weeks ago that the eligibility of employees participating in the scheme would be opened up is still only a government announcement, and it is yet to be made law. However, it is important to discuss as we anticipate that the legislation will be passed when Parliament next sits on the 24th of August. This only allows us 5 business days for employee enrolment and ensuring the business has met the wage conditions for the August period. When I refer to the wage condition, it simply means that businesses have until the 31st of August to make JobKeeper payments for fortnights 10 and 11 to these newly eligible employees. Due to the tight turnaround, there are a number of things businesses can be doing today in readiness for this announcement to be made law. Number 1, review employment dates for all employees who are not eligible as at 1 March 2020. If you have hired any new full-timers or part-timers since 1 March and they were working in your business at 1 July, they will now be eligible. Similarly, if you've had any long-term casuals whose 1-year anniversary of employment fell between these dates, they too will be eligible, provided they were working regularly and systematically within the business as provided by the scheme. If you identify any new eligible employees, you need to ensure you follow the proper processes. Ensure the employee is not participating in the JobKeeper scheme with any other employer. Ensure the employee completes and returns a JobKeeper nomination notice. Ensure you have paid the eligible employee a minimum of $1,500 in the relevant fortnight. And then once included in the scheme, the business can receive the full amount of fortnights 10 and 11 in August and each fortnight in September. The nomination notices on the ATO website were updated this morning, so you can begin providing these nomination notices to each of your newly eligible employees. Alrighty, that catches us up to the latest announcements regarding JobKeeper 1.0. Let's take a look at what has changed in JobKeeper 2.0. As mentioned, JobKeeper 2.0 is the next stage of the JobKeeper scheme, and there are a few changes from JobKeeper 1.0. Essentially, JobKeeper 2.0 has 5 key changes that you should be aware of. Firstly, the JobKeeper scheme has been extended to March 2021 for businesses that can meet the eligibility requirements. These changes to the business eligibility requirements relate to how GST turnover is going to be measured. Additionally, there are now 2 phases within JobKeeper 2.0, which will require separate assessment to determine business eligibility. Importantly, there is going to be a reduction in the subsidy amount per fortnight, depending on the period and eligibility of the employee. And the final key change is the introduction of a 2-tiered wage subsidy, determined by the average hours an employee and business participant is actively engaged in the business. So let's start with what has changed from the business's perspective. Well, JobKeeper 2.0 runs from the 28th of September to the 28th of March 2021 and has within this scheme 2 separate periods of testing and eligibility requirements and has been further broken down into 2 phases. Phase 1 is the period 28th of September to January 3rd, and this is known as the December phase. In order to be eligible for this phase, a business must show a decline in GST turnover for the September 2020 quarter versus its September 2019 quarter. This decline in GST turnover must be in actual terms and projected GST turnover will no longer be in use. Similarly, in order to be eligible for phase 2, known as the March phase, a business must show an actual decline in GST turnover in its December 2020 quarterly results compared to its December 2019 quarterly results. It's important to note your decline in turnover thresholds have not changed. For the vast majority of you, your threshold will be a 30% decline on a quarterly basis. With that in mind, I've prepared a couple of examples for us to walk through. Alrighty, first example. The first example is a business whose decline for turnover threshold is 30% on a quarterly basis. Now again, this threshold may vary business to business, but I'm going to assume that the majority of businesses here with us today have a GST turnover threshold of a 30% decline. In this example, we have assumed that the business had a relatively strong July 2020 compared with the same period last year. As you can see, for the month of July, the GST turnover decline is only 25%, which is still high. However, trade further declined in August and September relative to the same period last year, resulting in a decline in GST turnover for the quarter of 57%. Despite the strong July results, the business would be eligible for the December phase of JobKeeper 2.0 as its quarterly decline is above the 30% threshold. As you can tell from this example, you need to ensure you have access to reliable and accurate financial results for this period and for the same period in 2019. If you don't have access to this information, there are alternative tests available, but which test you should use depends on your situation. If you don't have access to this information, talk to your accountant or give us a call and we may be able to help. Now let's have a look at the December quarter for this business. I have extended our example into phase 2 of JobKeeper 2.0, and within this example, I've included some hope. As you can see, the business has improved steadily over these 3 months as we are hopefully back open by mid-October and are allowed to have patrons back in our venues. Over the 3-month period, the business experiences a significant increase in trade and hopefully a relatively strong December, all things considered. Regardless, even with a strong December, this business would qualify for the March phase of JobKeeper 2.0 as its quarterly decline year on year is still above the 30% threshold. From a practical standpoint, I think the majority, if not all hospitality venues in Victoria, will be eligible for both phases of JobKeeper 2.0. Just make sure you maintain appropriate records and undertake a calculation so that in the unlikely event you get a query from the ATO, you can respond quickly and with confidence. That just about covers all of the changes to business eligibility for the JobKeeper scheme. Let's take a look at what has changed once your business is considered eligible. If your business is considered eligible for JobKeeper 2.0, there will be a few changes you need to be aware of. So what has changed? Well, JobKeeper 2.0 introduces a 2-tiered wage subsidy. It is determined by averaging the hours worked by each eligible employee for the 4 weeks prior to their eligibility for the scheme. This can get a bit complex, but I will do my best to explain. Each JobKeeper eligible employee needs to be allocated to a tier for JobKeeper 2.0. There are 2 tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 employees are employees who have been actively engaged with the business for 20 or more hours per week on average in the 4 weeks prior to their eligibility for the scheme. Tier 2 employees are employees who average less than 20 hours a week over the same period. If the employee was eligible at 1 March for JobKeeper, the business must use the payroll records for February 2020 to determine eligibility. If an employee was eligible at 1 July for JobKeeper, the business must use the payroll records for February 2020 and June 2020. Whichever period has the highest average of hours is the period used to determine which tier that employee is to be allocated to. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide, so I'm going to take a breather here. Again, now's a great opportunity to pop some questions into the Q&A for Andrew, Tony and Jay, and then we'll get started onto the remainder of this slide. Okay guys, let's keep going. Allocating employees into the 2 tiers is a further administrative task for businesses at a difficult time, which might be a bit frustrating. However, this is a process we can begin from today in readiness for the next stage of JobKeeper. Identifying which tiers your eligible employees belong to early on will help you be better prepared with the communication, rostering and cash flow management of your business. From the 28th of September, the JobKeeper wage subsidy will drop from $1,500 per fortnight to a payment of $1,200 per fortnight for Tier 1 employees. There will be a further reduction in the wage subsidy for these employees who are designated as Tier 2 employees. Again, Phase 1 runs from the 28th of September to the 3rd of January. And in order to be eligible for this phase, a business must experience an actual decline in GST turnover for the September 2020 quarter versus its September 2019 quarter, as we spoke about in the previous slides. In Phase 2, the subsidy amounts drop even further, as the government is hoping that businesses will start to be reopening by this time, and there will be less reliance on the JobKeeper scheme. To be frank, I have my doubts. However, Please take note of the Tier 1 subsidy and Tier 2 subsidy declines for the March phase of JobKeeper 2.0. As at these levels, it's unlikely that the wages for your staff will be covered completely. My best advice is be ready, be prepared, and ask for assistance from your accountant or bookkeeper if you need help. That just about covers it all for JobKeeper 2.0. Let's have a quick review of what we have spoken about so far. Alrighty, so far we have covered the following. For JobKeeper 2.0, actual GST turnover will need to be used for the 2 phases of testing. You are still required to have a sufficient decline in GST turnover for each quarterly period. All other business eligibility conditions remain the same, but I do suggest assessing your eligibility before lodging your September BASs. Employee wage subsidy rates will change as part of JobKeeper 2.0, and businesses will need to determine which tier each of their eligible employees fall into. Again, there is no further change to employee eligibility, and disappointingly, there appears to be no intention to broaden the scope to include our industry's visa holders. That just about covers everything in JobKeeper 2.0 in a very complex nutshell. Let's just take a moment to take a quick look at other schemes that may be impacted by the JobKeeper extension. As we all know, rental relief is heavily tied to the JobKeeper scheme. The National Code of Conduct relating to rental relief made particular reference to the JobKeeper period. The existing policy supported by our state government specifies that the existing code expires on the 29th of September. We are anticipating that there will be amendments to the code by the Victorian government to extend this wording to encapsulate the JobKeeper extension period to March 2021. However, in the interim, I would suggest that you please seek legal counsel before entering any rental agreements beyond the 29th of September until the above is resolved. From a compliance perspective, just a reminder that the JobKeeper top-up payments are not subject to payroll tax, work cover, and superannuation in Victoria. This can vary state to state, so please be mindful if operating across borders. Alrighty, one more slide to go, guys. Hang in there. Alrighty, action items to take away from today to do. Firstly, review your employee listing and identify any employees who are eligible at 1 July 2020 to join JobKeeper 1.0. Get the nomination notices completed, and remember you have until the 31st of August to make payments for fortnights 10 and 11 for these employees. Secondly, check February 2020 payroll records to identify which tier each of your eligible employees will be allocated to for JobKeeper 2.0. Likewise, for those employees who are newly eligible at 1 July, please review your February and June payroll records and determine which period best applies to each employee. Remember, whichever period results in the higher average hours per week is the one we need to use. Fourth, ensure your accounting records and management reporting systems will allow for you to make an accurate and timely comparison for your decline in GST turnover for the September 2020 quarter versus September 2019 quarter. Don't forget, this will need to be repeated in January for the December quarter, so it is important to make sure you have access and the ability to make these calculations. The final action item for today might be the most important. Please ensure you have on record all completed JobKeeper nomination notices for each eligible employee. You have access to readily available accounting records and hopefully copies of your JobKeeper lodgement receipts. This may seem overly cautious, but you want to ensure you have the appropriate records should the ATO issue your business and eligibility questionnaire. Finally, I've added a bonus tip for you all that hopefully helps in managing your cash over the next few weeks. The August JobKeeper period is a three fortnight period, which essentially means you are covering 6 weekly payrolls in advance. This cash squeeze is further tightened as the 31st of August occurs on a Monday, and the August lodgements do not open until Tuesday, the 1st of September. I imagine you would all like to get reimbursed for the August period as soon as practical, so please ensure you have all information ready to lodge on the 1st, so that hopefully you will receive the August reimbursement prior to the following week's payroll. If not, you may end up essentially prepaying 7 weeks of payroll at a time when your business is likely suffering more than ever. I hope what I've spoken about today has proven helpful in your understanding of JobKeeper 2.0, and I appreciate that this is a highly complex scheme. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them through, or if you'd like to get in touch with me privately, I'm more than happy for you to contact me via my details listed up on the screen. I wish you all the best in business for the future, and if there's anything we can do to help, just reach out. Pat, I'll throw it back to you, mate.
Thanks, Freddie. That was fantastic. I very much appreciate it. You touched on it a few times there, but it's a question that we've been asked a few different ways by people in the audience today, and also privately in the lead up to the session. There we are. And the question has generally been around what people have phrased as blips in business, or quite a few people have talked about irregularities between different periods. The phrase "I had a really good June" has come up a few times. I mean, you did mention there that this will be based on quarters. So the fact that a lot of Victorian businesses had a really good June, I'm assuming will be covered by the fact that they might have had a okay-ish, probably not that great May and a pretty terrible July. So what's the general picture there?
Look, fortunately, and Andrew and Tony will also contend with this as well, that the initial announcement was to include the June quarter to be eligible for JobKeeper 2.0, but they've removed that. So regardless of how well your June was, or how good your June was, and that was the, I guess, experience for a lot of hospitality venues in Melbourne, as more and more people came back into their venues for in-house dining and I think being a bit more social and getting back out in the hospitality industry. They've removed that requirement. So now it really is only a test between the July to September months. And once you've met that quarterly decline for the September quarter, you'll be eligible for the December phase. And as I mentioned, I think for all Victorian hospitality venues, it's unlikely that you're going to be suffering any less than a 30% decline for the September and December quarter. And unless we're back open and trading to an almost full capacity in sort of October, November, which is the hope. That's the hope.
Absolutely. And I mean, this might strike you as a dumb question, but there are businesses that haven't signed up all their eligible employees to date, or that just haven't engaged with the program. Is there any reason that you can see to not get on board, even in this short window now that you mentioned, to the end of this month, actually, just to sign up people who've become eligible?
Yeah, look, you've touched on a couple of points there, Pat. So if a business is an eligible participant within JobKeeper, so they're actually participating in the scheme, they have to ensure any employee who is eligible is also part of the scheme. You can't pick and choose. Maybe Freddie can join, but Pat can't. It's got to be one in, all in from that sense. Look, if a business felt that they didn't have the cash flow or the cash reserve to prepay the payroll in advance, then maybe JobKeeper is not for them. But I think the government was sort of hoping, again, you may need to rely on your banks and access to whatever cash you can find, that there would be some relief from banks and be able to provide short-term funding to cover those payrolls in advance.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, I think by participating in the JobKeeper scheme, it opens the doors for, again, the discussions around rental relief. And I think I think at the end of the day, it might be a better way of engaging and maintaining that engagement with your employees. And also from a business perspective, it makes sense to join it if you can.
What, I mean, in your business at OnTap, what have been the main questions about the program to date from your clients in hospitality?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of the key questions were, particularly when the scheme was first announced, was how am I going to have enough funds to cover the first 4 weeks of payroll? What are the things I need to do in order to be in that position to essentially pay 4 weeks of payroll without any income or very minimal income coming through? And again, we go back and sort of talk about, okay, what are the discussions you can have with your bank? What are the discussions you can have with your suppliers, and what sort of terms can you come to an agreement with for those suppliers or those commercial contracts you've entered into that you can pause or suspend or defer? So that was probably the key question early on, was how am I going to make this work if I'm struggling for cash? Which, to be honest, that's the nature of hospitality. A lot of us do run by the seat of our pants because it is such a highly, I guess, such a high labour cost, such high product costs, and they've continued to grow over the last 15 years, where our sales prices haven't increased at all. So the margins are getting tighter and it's getting harder to manage cash. In terms of other questions have been more around employees, and what are the sort of things businesses need to be mindful of when putting an employee on the JobKeeper scheme, and how to facilitate that payment. Look, again, a lot of those questions are more HR, and we do try to provide some general advice in that respect. But again, we do our best to provide our clients the best advice we can.
We're, I mean, our next industry forum is going to be specifically about the bars trade, because I think it's probably safe to say that bars in Melbourne are being particularly hard hit by the pandemic and by the restrictions around the pandemic. You guys work with bars, you know, as one of your strands. What's the word from your clients? What are they feeling? What are the stress points for them?
To be honest, Pat, they're shattered.
Yeah.
And for bars particularly, because they are, I guess, the centralised hub from a social aspect. That's where a lot of people congregate. That's where a lot of people catch up for a drink and for a dance and for a night out. If they've had dinner, they're probably going to go to a bar or a club afterwards, and that's sort of their experience within Melbourne. And that's what Melbourne is famous for, is not just the food and the quality of food in the restaurants, but also the nightlife after dinner. Looking for the club owners and the bar owners that we have as clients, they're really hurting. And unfortunately, they were the first ones to have to shut because of the distance requirements.
Yeah.
They also would like to be the last ones to reopen. And with very little ability to make any or generate any income in the interim, because bars don't have the food offering that restaurants do, or that pubs even do. So for a lot of bars, it's unfortunately they've had to shut the doors and just wait it out, pray, hope that the rest of the industry can open up, and then the bars can open up. And unfortunately, that's the way it's looking. That bars will be the last, I guess, strand of or aspect of the industry that will reopen.
Although I guess we can take heart in seeing that, you know, in other parts of the country, those bars have bounced right back.
Yeah, and look, even I think it was WA, even 2-3 months ago, they had their pubs and bars open, which is great. And it looks like that beyond the shutdowns and restrictions, there's going to be great opportunities for not just restaurants, but also bars to reopen. And people are going to be more eager to go out, because maybe we took for granted how important a Friday or Saturday night or even a Tuesday night was to go out and catch up with mates for a drink and a night out. So that is hopefully, if we can get there, a positive to look forward to. It's just we have no real guidance on when that will be, unfortunately.
And what about employees? I mean, you're a business to business organisation. I realise that, but you know, you also live and breathe hospitality. Should they be concerned about these next two changes to JobKeeper? How can they prepare themselves? I mean, I guess just knowing what's coming is a big part of it.
Yeah, look, I think from an employer's perspective, much like a business owner's perspective, they need to be mindful of the changes to the JobKeeper scheme and what the impact may be for them. Because look, with JobKeeper 1.0, particularly in hospitality, there is a lot of casual employees who wouldn't typically earn $750 a week or $1,500 in the fortnight in their normal weekly working week. Now, what happens in JobKeeper 2.0, whatever they've received over the last 6 months is going to be reduced, and it reduces further again in the March quarter. I think it's really just about being mindful of what they can anticipate and discussing with their employer what sort of income will be available to them and planning appropriately. I think there's just as much responsibility on employees to plan as there are on business owners to plan for the next stage of business. And look, for the most part, I know all business owners don't want to lose their staff, and particularly not in this circumstance. They'll be doing their best to retain staff, keep staff, because no one wants to see somebody else hurt in these times. It's hard enough as it is.
We've got a question for the audience. Oh, no, the guys have just answered it. You're very quick, Andrew.
Very good. They're very good.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you've just tuned in addition to Freddie presenting, we've got Andrew and Tony on the Q&As, and they're answering the questions faster than I can voice them myself. So if you've got anything that you think might have been answered, take a look down at the Q&A box there on the answered questions thing, because the guys have covered quite a lot there as well. What about the end of JobKeeper? Now, look, I realise this is crystal ball work, but again, and it is 6 months, and we know there was a joke going around in April that said the last 4 weeks have been the longest 5 years of my life, and so we know that 6 months in COVID time is a long time in dog years. But how do you prepare as a hospitality business for what is currently slated to be the end of the JobKeeper program on 28 March, Freddie?
28th of March 2021. Look, Pat, it's hard enough, I guess, to predict what the next 4 weeks will look like. And in Melbourne, I think we've all pretty much resolved that we're going to be in stage 4 lockdown for at least the next 4 weeks. I think there's a couple of scenarios we probably need to work through. If hospitality venues can start to reopen in mid-October, like I've sort of put in my example, and hopefully by November or December, we're starting to see 75%, 80% capacity in restaurants, I think that will go a long way to, I guess, reassure business owners and employees that that next year can't be as bad as the year just experienced, which is a good thing. If we can get there, that'll be great. However, if we are still experiencing some strong restrictions, sort of mid-November into December into Christmas, which is the time when a lot of hospitality venues make the money to get them through the next 12 months, because that's when people go out. That's when people want to catch up and they're willing to go out and have a nice meal with their friends or family or somebody they haven't seen for a long time. If we're in that scenario, I think with the strong restriction scenario, I think next year will be quite difficult because into January, February and March, you're really looking at what is typically the downturn in the industry. Sort of the January and February particularly are quiet months. And look, March it may pick up again, but there's so many other factors to consider as well. Is the football going to be back on in Melbourne in March? And are they going to have crowds? Are we going to be able to have major events again? I know.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, here's hoping for absolutely. The Melbourne Food and Wine Festival is a massive event, and that draws so many people out from their homes and from all over the state and interstate. And those sort of major events really do fuel a lot of the hospitality industry. So, look, if we've still got strong restrictions in December, January, I would hope, and I would be asking our lobby groups and our association groups to start lobbying the state government and federal government for support beyond March, because if we're reopening in April, May or June, it's going to be a very, very difficult 12 months in 2021 on top of the difficult 12 months we've had in 2020.
Yeah. I think we've covered a lot there. Let's just hit that checklist again before, if you've tuned in and you've got the pen sharpened and the blackboard ready to take this down. Freddie, what are we doing? Straight off the bat, we want to check the employment dates of our staff to make sure that people who weren't perhaps eligible in the March assessment are now eligible.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing I'll do walking away from today, because the ATO have released those updated nomination notices, go back and identify any staff who weren't eligible at 1 March for JobKeeper. See if their status has changed with this new date of 1 July. So if there's any long-term casuals who were employed for 12 months between 1 March and 1 July 2020, they will now be eligible. So make sure you get those nomination notices completed. Likewise, and although this is unlikely in hospitality, if you've hired any new permanent part-timers or full-timers since 1 March and they were working in your business at 1 July, get them to complete the nomination notices, get them on the JobKeeper scheme, and ensure that you've made those payments for fortnights 10 and 11 by the 31st of August to get that full subsidy back. I think a couple of other things you could look at today is review your employee listing and determine which tier each of your employees fall into. The earlier you do that, the better it's going to be, or more easy it's going to be for you to start rostering and identifying what sort of hours each employee can work for you, but also communicating to employees what they can expect beyond the 29th of September. A lot of employees have got a lot of doubts, just like business owners have, and I think that communication is a two-way street. Let's talk it out with our employees, see what their concerns are, and I think you'll reassure them by acting proactively this early on. And look, the last thing is probably just ensuring if you're in the JobKeeper scheme, you've got all the documentation in line, because it is something that the ATO, by issuing these eligibility questionnaires, they are starting to look at it, and you don't want to be in the business that hasn't got everything lined up, because they're going to be making examples of businesses who do the wrong thing, which they should. No one should be rorting the system, and I think it's important to make sure you've got that information on hand to keep the ATO happy and keep your accountants and everybody else happy as well.
Yeah, I think that's worth remembering. I think the fact that we're all having a pretty ordinary year makes people think that some of these things are going to be let slide, and we can count on our friends in the tax office to observe that stuff to the letter of the law. So
yeah,
bad year worse.
Yeah, they're not going to give too much leeway, to be honest, Pat. I think the leeway they will give is if you've got difficulties, again, working out your comparisons, or if you didn't own the business and you're a new proprietor of the business, they're happy to have those discussions. But if you're not only not doing the right thing, or you're negligent in your paperwork or supporting documentation, that's when you're going to have issues with them.
Yeah, they're famous for not having much of a sense of humor about that stuff, unfortunately.
No, accountants haven't got much of a sense of humor.
Freddie, that's been really helpful. A lot of information, as you say, in a complex nutshell. If we want to find you, we can just Google On Tap Hospitality, and obviously, if you've registered for this forum, you'll have Freddie's details mailed out to you. But you can also check on the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival website. Our next industry forum is dedicated to bars, as I mentioned, and the survival of bars, particularly in Melbourne. On that topic, we'll be speaking to Zara Madrusin, who's a co-owner of Made in the Shade, Heartbreaker, The Everly, Bar Margot, some fantastic venues that I miss dearly. Tash Conti, the owner of Black Pearl, great Melbourne bar landmark, and Michael Bisquetta, who is a co-owner, of course, of Bar Liberty in Capitano, and also the CEO of Worksmith. I think that'll be a really fantastic session. So we'd love to see you there. We'll be posting registration for that one quite soon. But if you want to mark it in your diary in the meantime, it'll be on Wednesday, the 16th of September. But for now, thank you again, Freddie Deegan from On Tap Hospitality. Thank you, Andrew and Tony from Shinewing. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Pat. It's been a pleasure, mate. And thank you to everyone.
We'll just wave.
Cheers, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone in the audience for your questions and for your kind attention. I'm Pat Nurse, and thank you again.